Thank you for joining us. I know we're 1 minute past 9. So just to give a few introductions and caveats. Firstly, I'm Sally Penni. I'm the founder of Women in the Law UK. We've got a great morning lined up for you. Andy Burnham, who's the Mayor of Manchester, is going to join us at 9:45. Our other speakers are already on here. They'll speak after him. We've got Rose Marley, who's amazing. She's going to speak in a moment, and or say a few things. Ros Beaver, who is the national head of Irwin Mitchell, and she specializes in family law. If you've listened to my podcast, Talking Law, it's not a plug. Well, you could do what you like, but 17,000 people have listened to them. So I think they're all right. Then Ros is one of the people on the podcast. I can't remember which episode it is. So great morning plan. Make sure you've got a coffee and you're ready to go. This is going to be a really interesting morning because Andy Burnham is a real inspirational character. For those of you who are in London, because we're a national organisation, but our headquarters are in Suffragette City, Manchester. And so I really wanted to celebrate that and think about how we're going to build better after COVID and what skills we're going to need, and hear a bit about what Andy Burnham's doing. He was a former MP. He stood against Jeremy Corbyn, I think, or was it Ed Miliband? I can't remember. I'll hand over to Rose. And he's been leading Manchester. And you'll know him because he's always on Radio 4. You know, how many mayors you hear on there actively speaking about a number of issues. And just very quickly, I think Lisa or Catherine had asked people to donate, and the donation was going to go to Andy's homeless charity. So if you donated, brilliant. If you didn't, there's still time if you'd afford it or wherever else. So that's why that was there. I don't think she was very good at actually explaining it, but that's why that was there, because Andy has cut the homelessness in Manchester. It's not gone, obviously, but it's reduced substantially. And I think he's given half his income or something to the homeless charity. So can I hand over to you, Rose? You're going to say a few things. Where are you?
Great. So Andy is always late. So
actually, God.
I thought that while we are waiting for Andy to join so that we get the most out of, because then he'll still have to leave on time, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it's always with good reason. I'm not being flippant. He has got quite a lot on at the moment. But I thought I would just actually do this bit first so that we can find out a little bit about Sally, because Sally is going to be interviewing Andy when we get to introduce him. Now, I don't know who knows. Give me thumbs up, actually. You've all got reactions at the bottom of your screen, and you can do a thumbs up like that for a yes or no. And I was going to ask, who knows Sally because of women in the law, even. If you put your thumbs up because you know Sally because of this conference. Okay, so there's quite a lot of you then that know Sally professionally then also. But I'm also wondering who knows that Sally also runs a community business, Didsbury FM. So I'm just going to be a bit mean, Sally, and start by saying, what's your inspiration? Where do you get, you've got the most energy out of anybody I know. You are always doing something amazing. Where's your inspiration coming from, and how does your career in the law enable you to deliver on that? And it does look like Andy's here as well, so you've got about 1 minute.
Oh, right. Well, my inspiration is from my children and my family. My son almost died from leukemia, and I was a real turning point for me. There he is. And hi, Andy.
Hi, Sally. Can you see me okay?
Yes.
Oh, you're there.
Rose has just asked me a mean question, but you've saved me for answering the rest of it. So
we will come back to that, Sally.
Sure, she's got a few for me as well.
Look, you'll be delighted to know, Andy, that it's Sally that's going to interview you this morning. But I will introduce you, and I will be talking later. So for those of you, which I think is pretty much everybody that doesn't know me, I am the CEO of a social enterprise called Sharp Futures. I am head of our past, which is an Andy Burnham initiative, and I am chair of the Social Enterprise Advisory Group for Greater Manchester. which takes into account the three things that I am most passionate about, which are skills, young people, and businesses with purpose. And actually, I am really honoured to work with this incredible man on all three of those. And I don't say incredible lightly. In fact, I don't probably say it very much. But I have worked with many, many political leaders, business leaders, mavericks, innovators throughout my career. And I genuinely and honestly consider ourselves extremely lucky in Greater Manchester to have a mayor like Andy, because we need strong leadership right now. We need leaders with integrity and acumen in these times. So I'm really looking forward to the next 30 minutes. And also, given that this is Women in Law Network, it'd be interesting to look at as well, maybe how our laws and how women can play a part in Build Back Better as well. So I've already introduced a little bit about Sally, so I'm going to hand over straight to Sally and welcome, let's say, very, very lucky to have with us this morning, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham.
And I feel like we need to be clapping, because if we were in the real world, we would clap for Andy. Yeah, brilliant.
You're all very...
Good morning, Andy.
Morning, Sally.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know we were supposed to do a conference earlier in the year, and that got cancelled because of COVID. So it's brilliant to have you to join us. Firstly, you're a hero, certainly of mine. Otherwise, I wouldn't have invited you. And you've been doing a lot for our city and nationally, particularly during this time. But I wanted to really just start by asking you, this is all about how we build back better after COVID and skills. Where there's a lot of lawyers on here, a couple of non-lawyers, and so it doesn't have to be legally focused. But I wanted to start that from there, really. You've already been doing a lot in Greater Manchester before COVID on homelessness. You've had the diversity charter, and so on. But so I wanted, and our past, which I'm going to come to. So I've got a lot of questions, but not long enough. So from the beginning, really, Andy, how do you see us building back better after COVID?
Well, thanks, Sally, and thanks, everybody. It's lovely to be with you. I think things are going to change whether we like it or not, first off. So it's not a case of Build Back Better being a sort of airy-fairy kind of pie-in-the-sky idea. I just think things are going to change. Transport already is changing. It has to, because of the reality that we're living through. I think work is going to change. So I don't think we're going to go back to that very traditional Manchester Monday to Friday 9 to 5 working week with that painful commute that goes with it. I think we're going to see different ways of working. Hopefully, Sally, a new culture in the workplace.
Yes.
And I think this could really benefit women, actually, who, I was going to say rightly or wrongly, still have more of the home commitments to deal with as well as work. And I think the time has come to kind of really rethink the working week, the balance between home and work, the flexibility now that we can build into it. So I'll just start with that. I think there's a very practical thing about how we reshape the working week in Greater Manchester, and then the culture of the workplace as a result of that.
Yes. Well, I agree with you, and I'm really excited when you say that, because one of the issues in the legal profession and professional services, which is where I work and a lot of people work obviously on here as a business, doesn't have women as leaders at the top. Ross Beaver, who's on here, is a national head of Irwin Mitchell, who's, their offices overlook the Emmeline Pankhurst statue. And she's one of the rarities in the country. And so when you talk about culture and changing the work shift, I think that will change, won't it? Because we'll see more women progressing because we will have some of the basics. Can I ask you about Our Pass, which is an initiative that you introduced, which I love. And then I want to perhaps ask you about how people can think about what happens when young people use Our Pass and come to the city, and what we can do to help them, where they go beyond that. So perhaps you can talk to us about Our Pass.
Oh, well, I'd love to. It's my favourite topic, Sally, as Rose knows.
Shut him up.
Before I get to it, I just wanted to give you a little bit of kind of how I get to a point where I say Our Pass is something I really want to drive through. So, I
Oh, no.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second, but someone was trying to ring me. I graduated in 1991. So I grew up here, went to Cambridge, but came back and wanted to stay.
Oh no. Is it Radio 4? Can you cut them off?
No, it's not. I don't know who it is, but I'll turn them off. I wanted to stay in Manchester and basically wrote kind of thousands and thousands of CVs, couldn't get anything. And in the end, like a lot of people in that era, kind of conceded I had to go to London to develop my career. And I never forgot, I felt resentful of that back then, you know, and still do actually. And I think if you look at Manchester sort of 30 years on, evidenced by this call, there's organisations in the city that just simply weren't there. Yeah. You know, I was trying to apply to get into media organisations, but it would be true of law as well, wouldn't it? There are law companies with a presence in the city that just simply they wouldn't have had if you go back 30 years ago. And that's a massive thing. And you're probably wondering, well, how does this relate to RPAS? The way it relates to RPAS is that, but we're still not where we need to be. So what I see is we've got a kind of amazing looking city now with kind of fantastic new buildings and organisations that weren't there 20, 30 years ago. But is it yet the case that kids growing up in Moss Side, Harper Hay, Lee, feel that they can work in those buildings? You know, if they look at Manchester City Centre from the boroughs outside, and they can, you can see the skyscrapers from Lee now, do they think that they can go and walk through the doors of those places and work in them? The young people of Greater Manchester I'm talking about. And I would say not. You know, it's like this thing has been imported in and it doesn't feel like it's theirs. And RPAS is meant to be the sort of the passport to that, get them over the threshold. You know, that it's in a simple way, it's meant to be sending a message to them that we're encouraging them to think about moving around this amazing city region and building their career and their success here. So it's got to be seen alongside the opportunities that Rose is working on to kind of open doors for young people, but also a new initiative we've got called GMAX, Greater Manchester Apprenticeships and Careers Service. It's meant to be a sort of GM version of UCAS, where all of the opportunities in these amazing skyscrapers are in one place on one portal, so that they can start to say, well, I can see the opportunity now more clearly, and I've got my bus pass. Right, well, I can, you know, make that connection now. So that's why I'm passionate about it. You know, I just all my life have kind of seen, you know, kids from more working class backgrounds, kids from the black community, the Asian community, wherever it might be, kind of massively held back by the sort of culture of this country. You know, the sort of you know, the old networks and all of that stuff that we know about. And actually, they go around. I kind of feel this in my working life, even though the things that I've done. There's always a sense of inferiority for a bit when you go to a new workplace or a new, you know, you just feel you're not, you know, you're kind of, because of your accent or whatever. And that's just got to be smashed down and completely removed, I think, if Greater Manchester is to fulfil its potential. And RPAS is a sort of let's call it a modest first step, if you like, to sort of empowering a generation of young people to feel that they can do that.
Yeah. That is fantastic. I mean, there are people on here who are lawyers. I was saying Sam Hill has joined us. She's a QC, and I would say she comes from a non-traditional background, if you can say that. So in the legal sector, we're doing our best. But how do you see that we can play more of a part? How are we going to go post-COVID? Because COVID has also impacted young people, hasn't it?
Massively, yeah.
You know, perhaps more of a shock. How do you see us playing a part, and maybe how we're going to get out of it? And then I'll go to Rose for a question.
I think it's young people who've been probably most disrupted by COVID, so they've got to be a focus. But I just think it's also inequality in its broadest sense, isn't it? Hasn't it been laid bare by this sort of time that we've been living through in terms of the impact of the virus on different communities? But also, you know, I mean, I know it's kind of a bad thing to say when we're all having a nice kind of middle-class Zoom conference, but it hasn't probably escaped everyone's notice that while we've been doing things like this, other people have been out all the way through this crisis, working in keeping the country going, but actually often on the lowest pay and in very poor employment contracts. The inequality is obvious, I think, and so it is. I think it's about looking at the world with slightly new eyes now, isn't it? Coming out of this, and then you bring Black Lives Matter into that mix, and I think. We've been too complacent about too much stuff for too long. So I think all of that's kind of got to come together, really. We've talked about a young person's guarantee. So we are bidding for funding to be able to put in place a scheme where every young person in Greater Manchester has something to go to this year. Job, volunteering, training opportunity, work placement, internship. And to answer your question, Sally, that is where you could help. Diane Medal, I've appointed Diane. She's working with Rose, but Diane is leading efforts to develop a young person's guarantee. And the idea, as we did with Rose and RPAS, it's having someone like that who can reach out to a kind of wider range of organisations to sort of say, look, come on, can you do something? And so I'll make it very kind of plain to you on this call this morning, and I hope people on the call might be able to respond. If the Greater Manchester law community could say to Diane, okay, we've got 30 work placements here, or internships, paid internships, that is how you can help, if I could answer it that bluntly. And I am particularly interested in seeing how we might open those opportunities up to those who are most excluded at the moment. So I'm working with Operation Black Vote on a programme in Greater Manchester, which is around leadership, mentoring, sponsorship. They do it in the West Midlands, and I think they do it in London as well, and we've been too slow to put ours in place, and it's time to put it in place. So it's kind of bringing all these agendas together, isn't it? The urgency of young people's job situation, but also accelerating our efforts to kind of build a more equal Greater Manchester.
Well, that is fantastic, and I'm also delighted you brought up Black Lives Matter, because there is a noticeable lack of black leadership in our city, and we can't escape.
Massive.
Yeah,
No.
and it's more ironically, one of the most senior judges, who's black, or the only one, got COVID, and I was desperate. He's a dear friend. That the worst didn't happen. He's out, and because I thought that would not only be bad, but it would look bad for the diversity in our city. So I'm so pleased that you talk about those initiatives, and I think we will help where we can with the 30 workplaces, if you like, and more actually, until we get more young people, particularly young black people, in the workplace and not in prisons, for instance. Then that would be an achievement.
Sally, I think the key is if professional services could think of paid internships. I mean, this has been a bugbear of mine all the way through my life. Unpaid internships, that perpetuates class inequality, because immediately, if you're talking about an unpaid thing, you're knocking out large swathes of the most deprived parts of Greater Manchester, and that perpetuates the idea of parents who meet at dinner parties, fix up things, and a certain sort of person always then gets those opportunities, and that's the way the world works. And GMAX is intended to sort of move that into a more open, fair sort of arena, so everyone can apply. And I just would like, if there were more paid internships in the professional services in GM, that we could link to some of these schemes that we're doing around certain communities. I think that would just be wonderful.
Yeah, well, I think that's a wider conversation, really, for more of our services, because in my field, I'm a self-employed barrister. I work for myself. I set up this so we can broaden, the sector that I work in, which is not great. And so I think that's a broader conversation. I'm sure all of us on here will be happy to come and talk about it, because I suspect law firms will say slightly different, or want to work with ways that can be done now. But I think that's a good idea. I've always thought, giving up a week to do work experience when you can't even afford to travel, it is not exactly a way to open up social mobility. Rose, do you have a question?
I do, yes. So, Andy, obviously we have all taken a huge moment in time with the pandemic, and it's made us all stop in our tracks and think, and people have listened to the birds more or spent more time with the family, and there's been all this like utilising about what the future might look like. But how do we actually make sure that as lockdown starts to lift, we don't just return to normal because we get caught back up in that same treadmill that we've been on most of our lives?
Yeah, good question, Rose. My family have seen more of me in the last 2 months than they have in 20 years, and I'm not sure whether they think that's a good thing, to be honest. But it's definitely been different, hasn't it? As I say, something is going to change whether we like it or not. I just think, you know, the reality of living with COVID for a year is going to create new behaviours, and I hope many of them will be positive ones. Actually, the Greater Manchester Working Week needs to change, and so one of the things I will be saying at some point when the government advice changes around work from home, if you can, once it becomes you can go back to the office if you want to. I want to be saying to all of the professional organisations in GM who are city centre office based, don't just come back to normal. Bring us a certain number of people back, give us a certain number of people, give everyone the option of working from home if they want to for a certain number of days. Flexible start time to the working day so that people can balance home. I think that is a really specific thing, Rose. But I think going more broadly, I just think we're going to be in a situation where we have to intervene. The scale of what is ahead of us is massive. We've got the Royal Exchange this week coming out with their situation. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much sitting behind this now. And I don't yet feel that the government is going to sort of come in and fully, the logic of furlough was to sort of protect jobs through this thing. It looked like it's starting to feel like it was a temporary measure just to sort of, keep people in food and home. And, if you're going to follow through the logic of furlough, you've got to keep doing it for those industries that won't be able to open anytime soon. But I just think that the logic of what's going to come is we're just going to have to intervene massively and create jobs. So I'll give you one example. We've had this ambition about 2038, zero carbon, as you know. To do that, we have to retrofit people's homes to make them zero carbon. Whether the government helps us or not, I'm going to create a vehicle now to accelerate that, to create jobs for people. I'm told there could be thousands of jobs in that in Greater Manchester. We're just going to have to do it, and we're just going to have to find a way of funding it. So, these things change is coming. I think the green agenda will be accelerated by COVID quite substantially. But the other thing I would say is this goes back to this point about people who've been out there running the country and people who are, there's a contradiction, isn't it? They're called essential workers, but they're on the poorest conditions. If you're an essential worker, by definition, you need to be paid properly and have a secure form of employment to allow you to turn up for work every day. So again, regardless of what the government do, we are going to link the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter to all public procurement in Greater Manchester to send out the clearest of messages that we don't want poverty pay below the real living wage, and we don't want 0 hours contracts where people haven't chosen them. So these are things that we can do irrespective of what happens at a national level, and all of that, I hope, Rose, will kind of substantiate the Build Back Better sort of tag. Whether it will be as ambitious as people will want, will possibly not. But actually, if the government came in with us as a partner in some of this, then there is huge things that we could do. And it was interesting. I get on all right with him, but we have our moments, me and Boris. But I noticed how he pinched the phrase "Build Back Better" this week in his big speech.
Yes, I heard that.
Yeah, exactly. I know, and many things that are created in Greater Manchester get sort of get pinched, don't they? But so I don't mind him doing it, but using it, but mean it though. Build Back Better isn't just, they keep just talking about building projects, building kind of railway lines and bridges, and that's fine, but it's got to be about, I keep saying this, it's got to be about skin and bone, not concrete and steel. You've got to get help for people now. You know, that is Build Back Better, not promising HS2 in 2040 something or other.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, we've got some questions just before I go to the first one in the tab. I'm a non-exec director, trustee of the Royal Exchange, and when people are trying to get hold of me, it's because I am genuinely busy, not as busy as you, and it is awful what's been happening, and we have looked at all sorts of different areas, and and our board is very good. We have great donors and supporters, and the government needs to get involved because we are a very good organisation. I dread to think what else is coming. We've got Oldham Coliseum, we've got other theatres who are really struggling, Cornish theatres at the other end of the country. So I agree with you. I think this is not just a little 3 months here you go on the furlough scheme. You need to be extended. And it's not just for the posh middle classes. Theatres are trying to engage the communities we serve. Yeah.
Royal Exchange have got a fantastic idea, haven't they, about rebuilding the actual auditorium and taking it round Greater Manchester, which I just think is a wonderful idea. But what I did speak to the Royal Exchange yesterday. What I understand is that all theatres, pretty much all over the country, are pinning their hopes on the Chancellor's statement next week, and particularly extension of furlough until the live performances can resume. Because without live performances, the revenue just won't be there, will it? That's the fact. And I think we're hitting a point here, aren't we, about the philosophy that's underpinning some of what we've been doing to intervene in recent months. If they pull furlough now and let those things go down, what was the point? To me, it defeats the object of what they were trying. The whole idea is you sustain these economically crucial, but actually much more society. These theatres are crucial from a societal point of view, aren't they? And I think it's dire, really, what I hear if they don't do that on Wednesday. We're looking at the Royal Exchange of an organisation that people won't recognise anymore, will they? Certainly not for 5 or 10 years. And what does that do to people's hope and people's it drains the life out of cities, doesn't it? And how are cities going to recover? It's going to be a much longer road to recovery if you pull the plug on the cultural sector in that way. Yeah,
absolutely. Gosh, I'm feeling emotional thinking about it, because obviously I've been in lots of things.
It's real now.
I know. Right. I know we haven't got that long, but just very quickly, there are 3 questions so far in the 4. We won't get to all of them. The first one is this, Andy. How do you think that we can balance home working with the need to still support city businesses? For example, coffee shops, which and those sort of, because Sasha, who is the nighttime economy guy, is brilliant. But there is a daytime economy as well, isn't there? I know I'm say guilty of it. I love coffee. Have you got any ideas about how we can balance that, for example?
Well, it's, again, another great question, Sally. I think it's really important we do think about the daytime city centre economy. So when I'm talking about putting out a template for how we're going to get everybody back to Churchgate House, I am going to say, and we are going to get people back to Churchgate House because we want to keep the vibrancy of the city and we want to support those businesses. If we go with what some companies are saying, which is, we may not return this year at all, and we're not even sure after that, I'm a bit worried by that, because the city needs a vibrancy, doesn't it? And if we're kind of all plotting to work from home forever, I don't know about you, but I can't work from Zoom forever. I mean, it's all right, but but how can you balance those two things is your question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, if you gave people the mix, 2 or 3 days, 2 days home working, 3 in the office, I think the days you're in the office, you'd probably be more likely to go out and about around the city, maybe have a night in town. And, if you're there every day, 5 days, maybe you get in a different routine where you just bring in your packed lunch or whatever. But do you know what I mean? If you're kind of like mixing it up a bit, I think people possibly would probably then spend more, I'm in the city today, I'll go out at lunch. And you see what I mean? So I think there's a way of doing this that sort of gives people a better, more flexible working life, but at the same time, preserves the buzz of the city centre. It's going to be tough, isn't it? It's going to take a while to find a level with it, but we will. But I am serious. I think this is a moment to change the culture of the working culture of Greater Manchester. It's too traditional. I mean, you'll have all worked in London, most of you on this call. it's very different. And I'm still struck at my office in town. I mean, and I don't blame people for it, but 5 o'clock, the place is empty. And in London, it never was like that, you know, and maybe that's maybe we're importing bad habits if we kind of, you know, get too fluid with the working day. But a bit more fluidity, I think, would be a good thing for everybody.
Fantastic. Now, Andy, you've got 1 minute to answer 4 questions.
No, I'll stay for another 10 minutes, Sally. Don't you worry, if you want me to.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So the next question, so that question was from Nikki Jackson. Thank you. This is from Trisha Peters, who runs sort of networking businesses in Cheshire. She's asking this. Working from home is not easy for families with small homes, i.e. young persons living with parents and working from bedroom, you know, or young people living, mixing. You have to have a balance, essentially, is what she's saying. And she's asking, do you agree?
I do. And I think more than that, you know, when the Prime Minister first said stay at home, it sounded fine for some people. So, oh, stay at home. But actually, probably a lot of other people's hearts were sinking when when he first said those words, you know, stay at home. It's like not everyone's idea of safety, is it? Or easy in terms of the environment. So no, I absolutely get that, and we mustn't sort of rush to it as though it's the new thing. It's got to be a mix, hasn't it? And if some people want to be office based, that's what organisations I think need to do. They need to sort of offer a range of options, don't they? Some purely office based, possibly some purely at home. Middle ground for probably a lot of people will probably take a middle ground option. I would probably think, but for those people who really can't work at home, Sally, I think we need to sort of build on this idea of the suburbs being revived by this period we've been living through. You know, if we're going to see some of the more, you know, outdated retailers in our outlying towns sort of disappear from the high street, as I guess we probably are, you know, let's get in there and build some decent co-workspace facilities in those places, so people can work, if not at home, quite close to their home, just walk, you know, a couple of miles down to work from a shared working space on a high street, and then the coffee shops will come up around those kind of places. We've not been imaginative enough, I don't think, with our towns, and I think this is part of Build Back Better. You know, breathing some new life into our towns, and don't have them as these kind of quite depressing retail, betting shop, fast food. You know, rethink them, and you know, that's part of what we're doing with Chris Boardman. You know, the big emphasis on cycling and walking infrastructure. Let's make these places just much more attractive places to be.
Fantastic. Interestingly, the social enterprise I run, someone contacted me this week to talk about hubs, those are turning into a swimming pool into a hub. So if people are working from home, at the very least, they've got somewhere to go once children go back to school, and they've got the mix. And I thought that was actually quite a good idea if office people aren't going into offices. The next question here is from Lindsay Orr, and she's asking about strategy, because she's seen that you and Steve Rotherham, the mayor of Liverpool, have been talking a lot about economies on a diverse basis. And she said that she thought it made great sense, the cultural links, the geographical area with the port and the airport in construction. And she said the fact that you both have the ear of forest is the strategy building moving forward.
I can see Lindsay. I don't know if Lindsay wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a clear question. Sorry to be barristorial.
No, it's okay. I think so. But
Lindsay?
Andy, I just thought that it made sense with it seemed that there was a plan with all the other, you know, the other policies and the other things that have been going on during COVID with the homeless, and so many links and positive things that had happened. And I thought it was really a massively inspiring talk that you both did on the sort of fundamental sort of big money projects with Liverpool and Manchester, aside from the jibes on music and various, but I just thought, you know, moving forward with all, rather than doing it separately with investments and these ground strategies, that these links were a really positive force. Not necessarily devolution. I'm not sure I agree with that particularly, but I just thought the whole plan was a great plan, and obviously both great personalities with a lot of, you know, basically power in the area.
Yeah, thank you.
No, so I'm really pleased you make that observation, because Steve and I do, and we are great friends, but we do, not always, but occasionally, sort of do joint things to show that we're kind of, you know, we're aligned, and we're trying to bring the two cities forward together where we can. And I'm always struck by the reaction it gets. It always gets quite a big reaction, particularly from sort of Granada land, if you like. You know, it's people get struck by it, and I think they like it. I mean, I know everyone kind of wants always to go on about the rivalry, but we overplay that, I think, at times. You know, of course there's competition, of course there's rivalry, and you can celebrate that. But actually, as you say, there are big projects in the green economy. I mean, Steve is trying to build a tidal barrier on the Mersey. So if we came in as an investor in that and had guaranteed access to, you know, 50% of the energy that comes out, that's going to help me decarbonise the grid in GM. So, you know, and then on a more people-based thing, we're both developing the good employment charter I mentioned is basically the same. Liverpool have adopted our model, which is fine. And I wanted him to, because your companies, probably some of them work in Liverpool and Manchester. I don't want them saying, well, Liverpool are trying to make us do this and you're trying to make us do that. We need to build a consistency in what we're both doing to make devolution make sense to people. Because if it doesn't, that will turn people off devolution if it all becomes too complicated and sort of contradictory. So yeah, no, we'll carry on doing that, Lindsay. I think we do have traction. The Northern Powerhouse thing, you know, we can all have our views about it, but because the government said it, Steve and I have leverage over the government in a way that the north of England has never had before, and we are obviously determined to use it.
Brilliant. So two questions or three questions left. If I read them out to you, Andy, then at least you can be thinking about them before you go. The first one is from Sue, who says, can Greater Manchester have the opt-out option without school fines for parents that don't want their children to return back to school in September? That's the first one. Then the next two questions are from Sean Darlington, and she says, the Manchester skyline changes all the time. Every time I blink, another building goes up. To be fair, that's fair of London. Do you think the increase in home working following lockdown will impact on the ability to occupy those buildings? And also, she says, about encouraging a more diverse workforce, particularly in law, I think we need to start early, talking and encouraging 12, 13, 14-year-olds to consider charter paths that they wouldn't, to consider career paths, I should say, they wouldn't have thought of. Is there any central initiative around doing this in Greater Manchester that businesses and professionals could join?
Good questions.
Yeah.
Sally, I better make these the last ones if that's okay. Just
yeah, they are. I won't take any more.
No problem. I feel bad, but I'm getting hassled here to do the next thing. So the first one on schools. Schools isn't devolved, unfortunately. It's a frustration of mine. We have probably least leverage over education policy than any other. We have adult education, but not school age, and that is a very firm government policy. The academies are the be-all and end-all, and schools and the Department for Education will decide everything. My personal view is it's just simply not right to be talking about fines for parents, I don't think, in the middle of a pandemic. That's my view. It's fine. They come out and say, oh, well, kids aren't really affected, and the chances of them getting them something in school are very minimal. But if you have an elderly parent living with you, you're not going to feel great about that, are you? It's not just the child, is it, that you're worrying about? You're worrying about somebody else as well. So to talk about fining people, I just don't think is right, in my view. I've made that sort of clear, but can I do anything about it? Well, no, unfortunately. It's obviously government policy. On the city and the buildings, I'm a bit, I think all cities are a little worried, Sally, at the moment. You know, we've obviously built a lot of space on certain assumptions about city working that are being challenged now, and you know, there's going to be a period of adjustment, I think, and it's going to be a tough time for the property industry. But Rose and I have been talking about the idea of, you know, opening up some of those buildings, some of maybe your offices as co-working spaces, or even startup space for a period. You know, kind of use them to bring on the new. You know, I think there's an opportunity there. Always, green shoots can come through, can't they? It's something that's a challenge. I do think, actually, though, and this is a process that's been underway pre-COVID and might now accelerate, which is what we call north shoring. There is lots of evidence of London-based, the country's London-centric politically, but it is commercially as well. Organisations tend to heavily focus their operations and their HQs on London, and they too have sort of mirrored the sort of the political imbalance of the country. We hear a growing number of companies saying we just can't see the case for over kind of focusing on London anymore, and we need to sort of rebalance our own operation. And I think that might accelerate post-COVID. The finances of office space in London, I think, might become even less sort of less sustainable, and we might be the main, because we've got the office space that is of London grade ready to go, which other cities haven't been able to build. So I think you've got to look on the bright side, haven't you? And I think there is potential for more north shoring coming out of this. And then on that last thing, I think it's such an important point, that, isn't it, about those pathways. Here's where your organisation, Sally, and we can work in more partnership, I think. I was talking about those kids, wasn't I? The kids looking at those skyscrapers. It is still a very complicated journey. They can't quite see how they get from where they are to that building at the moment. It's they've got more of a feeling that they might be able to do it, but they can't see that pathway really clearly laid out. And I think we need to lay it out for them. So this is what GMAX is about. It's meant to, as I say, it's meant to be the UCAS of Greater Manchester. If you, as the law community, could say, here's our unpaid internships, here's our apprenticeships, here's our degree apprenticeships, if you brought those into one place, then you would build a culture of young people understanding how they could start to make a journey towards that. I always remember a young woman who I got to know when I was MP for Lee, who had I think a degree apprenticeship at Penni's, I think. And I was always really struck by how fantastic that was as an opportunity for her. No tuition fees, living at home, but it was a brilliant opportunity, that. And it surprised me when I first heard about it, that you could do it. I think you can do a degree apprenticeship, can't you, in law? And I just don't think we're promoting those things very well. I think we've got to sort of, if you don't mind me saying, sort of the law community needs to think about promoting itself in Bolton, Wigan, Oldham, Rochdale, because the cell is a different one, I think, to young people there, rather than the graduate cell. And yet there are some fantastically talented kids there that are just waiting to sort of be brought through. So GMAX is the vehicle, is the answer to the question. The question was, is there a central initiative? Yeah, and that's what it is. But it's in a very early state. And Dan Medall and Rose Marley are under pressure to get it all built and sorted out. And within, I don't know, a year, all right, Rose? Is that all right? Do you need?
Yeah, no. As you know, we can move mountains in Greater Manchester.
I know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're coming to end. Andy, just before we go, Ros Beaver, who's the head of Owen Mitchell, she's going to speak later on, and they're doing some really great and interesting things there. So I'm sure the Ros will be keen. I was going to make it big on the screen, but I think she'll kill me. Where is she?
I would kill you. Don't do it.
I remember
I was just going to say, we run a Prime program where children from disadvantaged backgrounds, teenagers, come into the office. We do work experience with them. We give them training on interviews and techniques. But it's all about looking at skills and harnessing talent. It doesn't have to be a graduate. We have an apprenticeship scheme. I personally wasn't a graduate I was a graduate when I started in the law, but not in law. I'd done construction, and I had the opportunity, very fortuitously, to be able to have somebody, a boss who was really brilliant and paid for me to do a conversion, me to do the LPC. I would never have thought I could qualify as a solicitor, frankly, and therefore I think it's so important that we invest in all sorts of skill sets and bring them in. I will talk ad nauseum about internships. There's obviously a lot of pressure on profit, etc. at the moment, but it's something that we can look at, and I'm sure other firms across the city will do likewise.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. I mean, I should say, I know that you're all doing lots of brilliant initiatives in that space. So it's not as if, I apologise if I sounded like I was, asking for something that is already there. And I think the point I've just said is sometimes it is quite individual to the companies.
Yes.
And therefore, the kids find it hard to find out about. The word of mouth doesn't reach Lee very easily when it's just one company. Do you see the point that I'm making? Whereas if it was Greater Manchester Law, they possibly then could find out about that, and then all of the different offers of the different companies within. Then, that I think is the bit that I would sort of call for a more structured. There's a great opportunity here.
Even more important at the moment, whilst the city centre is out of bounds pretty much, that we get out to the boroughs. And I think that is really important. It's just how we adapt. The flexibility and adaptability is required whilst BAU. So it's trying to have the resources. I mean, we are quite fortunate in that we have a volunteer policy, so members of our firm can go into the community, and we do a lot with the community already via our CSR programs. But it is a huge emphasis for us and for other firms in the city. I'm not trying to promote Owen Mitchell necessarily, but it is a big on the radar.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Good point. Well, Andy, I think we've run out of time. I'd love to sort of keep you here.
I know, I've enjoyed it, but sorry, Sally, to have to go.
No, not at all.
Be part of it. Thanks for all the kind words. And let's keep this conversation going, though, is the main thing to say, isn't it? Because obviously, as I said, Rose is working with Diane. We would want to have a sort of a conversation like this with all professional services in Greater Manchester to say, can we collectivise what we're doing a bit and really start to because then therefore it'll be easier for us to sort of provide the extra support to you as organisations to get out to the boroughs. And so I understand the point that was just being made, but that's where we can come in. We can do those introductions, we can do the work in the boroughs for you.
Fantastic.
But it's been brilliant, though. So we can build back better. It's not a slogan.
That's why I stole it to read back to you and credit you with it. Can we give a round of applause and Andy ask you to come back and speak at a later time at conferences and update us?
Thank you, everybody. Brilliant. Enjoy it.
Brilliant. Wasn't that great,
everyone.
Andy? Bye. See ya. Bye. So next up. What was that? I think we got everybody's questions that wrote in the chat, and I think that was exceptionally good. We're going to go to Rose now. Rose, welcome to Women in the Law. Now, you've spoken at other events for me before about entrepreneurship and social enterprises, but not to anybody who's on here, because our audience is different. We've got like 3,000 members. And so I want us to start from the beginning about who you are really. What is Sharp Futures? Why did you set it up?
Okay, so behind me you can see something called the Sharp Project, which is a little like Googleplex or something. It's the old Sharp Electronics on the main arterial route out of to the north of Manchester towards Oldham and the north. And when actually, we're about to hit the worst economic downturn, but prior to that, who remembers the credit crunch and all the drama that came with the credit crunch? And so in 2008, when kind of big venture projects collapsed in Manchester, one of them being the refurbishment of this building you can see behind me, the Sharp Project. This building kind of sat around empty for a long time, collecting rainwater and rats. And it wasn't until, it was actually when BBC announced their 5-department move to the north, that Manchester Council had a look at all their assets in their property portfolio, because they bought this building back from the collapsed venture because it was such a key location and in a deprived area of the city that needed regeneration. And basically, to cut a long story short, and it was actually at the funeral of Tony Wilson. So for those of you who don't know who Tony Wilson is, he started Factory Records and Found New Order and the Happy Mondays and all that kind of stuff. And he was at the helm of Manchester, if you like, but he was also a broadcaster for ITV. But when Tony died, actually left a big hole in the city. And it was at Tony's funeral that we managed to convince actually the leaders of the city, including Sir Richard Leese, Manchester City Council's leader, to give us this building. But not give it, they still own the building, but to let us run it and let us turn it into a big complex for creative, digital and tech, because this building wasn't right for the BBC, but through that exploration we'd realised that it did have loads of different space, it had power and connectivity, so there's now 60 businesses in there, and then massive stages where BBC, Channel 4, ITV put on huge television shows. We've now got a sister site called Space Studios in Fujitsu where international Netflix dramas come from, and actually I only agreed, I was the founding COO of the Sharp Project and Space Studios, and I know nothing about ops. I'm rubbish at ops, I hate ops, I don't care about air handling systems. But I agreed to do it for one condition, and that condition was that I would be able to set up a social enterprise, Sharp Futures, which was all about developing the talent and skills for the local kids, because there's no point in plonking a building like this in the middle of a place like Newton Heath and not making it relevant to those young people's careers. And my experience was really similar to Andy's, that, you know, I thought, wow, I've got my degree, first person in the family to get a degree, you know, this is it, I'm going to get offered all these amazing jobs, and there was absolutely nothing. It was down to connections. There was no way I was going to, I used to write to the BBC every single day on Granada saying, please, can I have a free internship? The only internships I could get were in London in music business, and I couldn't afford to live there. So, and I did actually go on to, because of Tony, again, I did go on to have an incredible career in music and entertainment. And it was because of that. And I lived in London 3 days a week. Somebody asked Andy before if they'd missed London. I love London. I miss being there as much as we were. But yeah, the whole of what we do at Sharp Futures is about sharing with people. If your family, if you know your dad's a taxi driver and your mum's an NHS receptionist, you don't know what UX is and editing and how you can build a career around being an influencer or being actually, you know, a DOP, a director of photography. So we spend all our time doing everything from, sorry, that's my children. We spend all our time doing everything from careers, tours and talks through to, we developed this amazing system called Pod, People on Demand, where you can book young people to do things like resize your JPEGs for social media or do a bit of editing. It's like freelancing on payroll, and it kind of crowbars people into the sector. And our clients are big clients like Channel 4, ITV and BBC, but they're also tiny weeny graphic designers in shipping containers. So hopefully I've just given you a bit of why I do what I do, and yeah, would love to talk and find out from you guys as well, but about skills, because we are hitting industry 4.0 and the world was already changing and the skills need is already massively underskilled for what is needed going forward. So yeah, that was really why I'm very grateful, Sally, for the opportunity to talk to everybody today.
Fantastic. Now, Rose, one of the things I want to ask you about Sharp Futures, apart from the fact that you know, the pod, which is a great idea, and I'm always talking about the pod because they can do all, you know, when I take and post blurry photos, for those who have seen them on LinkedIn and all the other platforms, that's what pods do better. You know, they make it look great, and they do other stuff on the social media, and they're young people who are gaining skills that they wouldn't otherwise skill, because some of your young people have got jobs at BBC, you know, they've actually really excelled very well. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Rose, was this. Can you tell us a bit about social enterprises? Why are social enterprises important? And what are they? Because it's a disconnect, isn't there? That people think everything's a business. What is a social enterprise, and how do they impact society?
Okay, so a social enterprise is a business which constitutionally operates a double bottom line. So all businesses will be concerned with their financial bottom line. You know, have we got enough money to keep our doors open, to grow, to invest? But actually in a social enterprise, and there's lots of different formats, you can be a community interest company, company limited by guarantee, but it's about that it's built into your institution that you want to create a social impact through your business dealings. So it's not running a business and then giving money to charity, running business and having a CR department. It is inherently built into the constitution of your company. And with the example with Sharp Futures, which is a community interest company administered by Companies House, our ambitions are to social mobility in the creative industries, pretty much is what it all boils down to. So like I say, social enterprise runs a double bottom line, so they will measure your social return on investment as much as your financial return on investment. When you are in a board meeting, it significantly changes the dynamics in a board meeting, because under FIDU, I don't know if we've got any company lawyers on here, but under the Company Law Act, you do have a fiduciary duty as a director, ultimately, to make as much money as possible for the shareholders. Whereas in a social enterprise, your duty is to make as much impact as possible on the social objectives you set out. That hugely changes a decision-making process, because actually that's a real tug of war. Often what's the best thing to do financially is not the best thing to do for the community, and vice versa. So you have to have a board, and I'd recommend all of you, because everybody wants lawyers on the board. It's so helpful to have lawyers on your board. I'd recommend everybody to consider putting themselves forward to be on the board of governance for social enterprise, because you need as many people who've got that kind of financial, really hard running a business anyway, and keeping your doors open, but then you've got this added, like I say, impact about, well, how many young black people are you bringing onto your books, Rose, and what did you do about that kid that's got the disability and really wants to be working in drama production in the BBC, and actually how are you going to make sure that the kids from the local area are actually working within the sector. So all social enterprises, the biggest one, and we're so proud because it was started in Greater Manchester, the biggest and the first one is the co-op, so the co-op, there's one in every postcode, so there'll be one near you, but they are not like, it's not like buying your loaf from other places. It does actually do an incredible amount of work in the community with the profits that they make, or surplus. They like to say surplus a lot more in social enterprise than profit, although I'm big on the fact that you trade in a social enterprise. It's not a charity. It's not about going around asking people to put their hands in the pockets to help you with a problem. It's about using a problem to create a business and solving that problem whilst making money. So it's dead hard. And I should have asked Andy a little bit about it more, but we're talking a lot about how those mechanisms might become more of delivery for Greater Manchester, because right now people go, oh, it should be privatised or it should be the public sector. And actually what we do, and you can see behind me, I've got a building owned by the public sector that is full of the private sector, and the social enterprise in the middle is joining it all up and making it all make sense.
Yeah. Wow. I know I can talk to you forever, but my next question, and I will allow some time for questions as well from the floor, is about our past and what skills actually mean. Because we were having conversation, weren't we, where I was saying where we work in Manchester at Spinningfields, that's a very closed shop if you're a young person who comes to the city. It's a bit like Liverpool Street maybe in London or whatever. But so what I want to ask you firstly is, Andy's already told us about our past and what it's trying to do. But what do you want to see it do? And where do the young people go when they use the past? Because they don't go to the courts. They don't go to, Ross's office or, the Emmeline Pankhurst statue, do they? They go to the retail sectors. So actually, they need to move into the greater aspirations, which is the idea. So can you tell us a bit more about that? What do you want to see it do?
Yeah, so just for clarity, our pass is it's a travel pass aimed at what would be equivalent years 12 and 13. So you leave school, and actually in Greater Manchester, unlike in London up until recently, choosing the college you might go to next is a financial consideration, because if you need to get 3 buses, it's going to cost you about 400 quid a month, so you can't afford to go to that college. So Andy's big thing was that you shouldn't be making your decisions about your future. Can I afford to take an apprenticeship? Should I just start a normal job? All of that shouldn't be a travel cost. So it started with free bus travel for for that age group, but you always wanted it to be more than just the bus travel, and it be a path to opportunity. So there's kind of 3 types of opportunity. You know, one is very much like you say around the retail and the bling that gets the attention of all our young people. So, you know, you do get a free JD lanyard when you join up, or you can get discounts off at certain clothing brands, etc. But there's also experiences which can be free and discounted. So Royal Exchange used to do loads with us, so it's really
I know.
the theatres, football clubs, free swimming for a week, so tons and tons of stuff that's either free or discounted. And then, as you've said, then we do the careers bit, which we do taster days, because actually we leave the work shadowing and the more detailed stuff to GMAX, but actually you've got to get someone's attention in the first place for them want to work shadow, to want to. So we've not done a law taster, and I'd love to do a law taster, because you must experience it like we do in our sector, that people think they want to work in a certain business, and when they get there it's not what they want, or it's not quite what they thought it was. And how much heartache could we save everybody if they found out? You know, let's do tasters about what it really is like to be a human rights lawyer, or to work in family law or commercial law, and what's the difference, and how could we create an amazing experience. And maybe we'd even do it on Zoom now, where you put people in breakout rooms and give them legal challenges, and like find that in them. And then if they're like, you know what, that's brilliant, it's like, right, okay, well then we've got go over to GMAX, and you've got work shadowing. And actually if they hate it, good, because they're not going to waste the next 6 years of their life trying to do something that it turns out they're not going to like, you know. So I would love us to do some taste of law stuff, what, you know, and not to make it look different or better than it is. It's like, what is it really like working within law, you know? And actually definitely happy to. I was going to give Andy a bit of a hard time. I didn't know I had questions for Andy, Sally, so I would have.
Well, I know, but the trouble was he didn't have long enough, so I thought, let's not cross-examine him.
Yeah, no, I did. I was thinking, but the women stuff, you know, there's a lot about there's a lot about, you know, I am one of the, up until Diane's appointment recently, I was the only female advisor, you know, and Andy's really good on diversity and women. So actually, you know, as much as, you know, like I say, these taste and experience for our pass holders that leads them into stuff. The other stuff is, let me just tell you this, because I really want to impart this knowledge, because you came on to talk about skills. When you look at the top 10 skills that are needed in 2020, you know, they never say people need to be able to use, you know, Adobe, you know, Flash, Python. They're never about those technical skills. They're about actually the foundational skills. So number one, complex problem solving. Number one skill that's needed, complex problem solving. And we've got to remember that there's so much automation going on. So if you think about big data and machine learning, you know, the reason a complex problem solving is a need, because actually, and analytics are in there as well, but actually you get that slightly wrong and you produce the entire wrong result. You know, you need to understand a lot about the complexities. Critical thinking, creativity, which is absolutely being carboshed in our schools. I'm so angry about the lack of creativity in our schools for Generation Z, which is the children that we're bringing up. As most of you look like, there's quite a lot of you look like Gen X and millennials there, so we're all bringing up the Gen Z. Emotional intelligence, you know, we've got young people with more and more mental health needs than ever, and we're expecting them to be emotionally intelligent. I mean, the good bit is if you've had counselling, they probably will be, but you know, it's a skill that we are not teaching in our schools. Judgment and decision making, this is where you girls come in, you know, this is like a really important skill. Services, negotiation and cognitive flexibility. And I think I've got that on the slide actually. So in a second I'll throw that on the screen, or I can share that with you. But these skills we are not teaching our young people at all. Can I just tell you one of the most disappointing things about our pass last year? Our pass was a complete smash. Over 1 million journeys within a month were made on the buses. We had people going to football matches like they'd never been before, going to the Halley Orchestra, taking the nanas to stuff. It's been amazing. One of the most disappointing things though was when we sat and did workshops and groups with the young people, the things that were disappointing were things like nobody had applied for it themselves, they'd got the parents to do it, or they hadn't seen the letter that came with the pass because they don't open their own post. What are we doing to our kids? Hello, let's stop doing all this stuff for them. You know, we're creating like a generation of young people that can ski but can't get 2 buses across town, you know. Yeah. And so we've got the skills. Really the best gift we can give our young people are the basic skills of independence and common sense, and let them get out there and let them feel a little bit of danger, because you're allowing them to go to the shops, and you know they've got to consider people around. It's dead hard to do. We all want to cut the apron strings. It's dead hard to do, but I don't think we've done our young people any favors. We've done it with love. We've tried to give young people. I can see quite a few of you know, the students on there. I'd love to know what you think, but I just don't feel like critical thinking is a brilliant example of, you know, when schools like spoon feed young people, that's no use to us employers. You know, you work out where you're supposed to be and when, you know, like that's not my problem. I'm your boss. I'm not here to manage your timetable. First thing that happens to every apprentice that starts with us, and we do it every single time, I book them for a meeting on about day 3 at 10 o'clock, and then the other director books them for a meeting at the same time, and then so does one of the team members, and so does we all book them at the same time, and they accept every meeting. And then I sit in my meeting going, well, where are you? And everyone else, where are you? And it's like, day 1, you are responsible for your own diary, yeah, because you've never been responsible for your own diary. How are we doing that? So sorry to yarn on, but it drives me mad, Sally.
No, do you know, this is the things that we need, and in the legal sector, because what we find is when I have pupils, then they end up saying, I'm sorry, I can't do the one piece of research that I've got all this time to do because I've got so much on. And you're like, you're not doing anything. All you've got to do is follow me around. You know, Sam's on here. Sam had a very good pupil because she was an ex-solicitor. So, you know, she's not on here, Helen, but you know, she was an ex-solicitor, so she'd had another life. But a lot of the youngsters we need, there are those issues, so then they end up being called snowflakes and whatever. And there is a thing about the skills, and we need to tell them and give them the responsibility. So, Rose, I am on there. We've only got 9 minutes left because I know you've got an 11 o'clock call. Can I ask you one quick question? And then if you've got a question, write it in the chat, please. Very quickly, I want you to tell us about why you left the music industry to come and do Sharp Project, and I want to know about the silver pants. You know, I know this story. I've got a question about well-being, which I can forego, but if people have got questions, right, there's one in the chat. Why did you leave the music industry, which you were hugely successful at, to come and be doing this, which is obviously much more meaningful and interesting?
Well, and you know, you never leave the music business. I put on a massive event together in one voice, Adley and Gallagher headlining.
Well, we're going to run out of time because I've got 9 questions basically left and we've not got enough time.
But in answer to your question, Sally, so I never actually planned to join the music industry. I just spent my whole life from about the age of 14 trying to get backstage. And that ended up being a career, which there was a moment in time where this accent had a value in the entertainment business, and there was quite a lot of us that, you know, created our own incomes and changed our life trajectory because of that. But actually, you get to a point when you can get backstage anywhere, and you don't want to anymore. You don't care, or you kind of had enough of it. And you know, there was just a point, and I was probably about 27, 28, just kind of got married, been with the same man for 300 years or something. Started thinking about having children, and started thinking about what kind of, it's a bit of a cliche, but what kind of world am I bringing these young people into? And that nurturing bit that you have in you when you're pregnant. I mean, most people sort the nursery out. I started a social enterprise. The nursery's still not done, and I know how long it is because I've got a 15-year-old sat behind me that came on my first pictures in his cot, you know, when I was pitching for money to set it up. But yeah, there was a point, and Sally's referring to the point when I was working for a band and I had to source some bulletproof pants for this artist for free for a gig in LA. He wasn't even a gangster rapper, and I remember just it's the palaver to get these pants for him, and he never said thank you, which wasn't a big deal, but I just remember thinking, is that it? You know, pulled off this massive queue. I'd got him these bulletproof designer pants for him to wear on stage. Is that it? Is that what you're doing with your life, really? And it was that moment that made me start looking into how could I use all the skills and knowledge I've got to make a difference. And I didn't even know social enterprise was a thing until I started on that journey, and that's how I ended up doing it.
Fantastic. The well-being question can wait. What do you do for well-being? But Sean's got a question here, which I think I want to ask you, please. She said, I've visited the Sharp Project and it's such a fantastic space. I want to work there. So do I. I was like, can I just not live here and work here? And, you know, use the drone man who films like crime scenes. Yeah, there's so many different talent there. Sean's question is this, Rose. She says, getting involved on the board of a social enterprise and how can lawyers identify these opportunities?
Well, it's a really, you know, I'm sure you've come across things like the In Touch networks that do board of governance. But, you know, in my experience, find your passion. You know, you don't sit on things voluntarily that you're not interested in. So if your passion is around recycling, or it's around, you know, early years, or it's around old people, go start, you know, put in social enterprise, old people, see what comes up, have a look at what people are doing, and then approach them and say, I'm looking for non-exec board positions. I've got a lot of skills to offer. They are also, there's something called Pioneers Post, which is the trade body for social enterprise. So it's worth, you know, subscribing to Pioneers Post. You can find out from there. I would like to offer, as soon as we are back able to offer tours of the Sharp Project, I would like to offer this group a tour so that you can find out more about it, but also so that you can talk. Some of you are asking me how can you get involved? How can you get involved with RPAS? My Twitter handle is @rosemarley1, so just DM me, hit me up. But yeah, I'd absolutely love for you to get involved. But Pioneers Post would be a good starting place.
Fantastic. Rose, we've got 4 minutes whilst people write a question if they've got it. Can I try and deal with some of my 9 remaining? One of the issues is about burning out. I know you've always had really good assistants that you allowed to work flexibly. I mean, you had that one who was working on Coronation Street, but she still managed to do all your work. I don't know how she did it. And so you were quite cool and easy about that. So as a leader, which is what you are of that organization, you know, have you just allowed your staff to be flexible? And how's that benefited you in terms of well-being and your own well-being, really?
Well, yeah, it's fascinating as well in lockdown. So the particular young woman you talked about, Rachel McGuinness, who is an actor who's in all sorts of stuff, Coronation Street included. She came to me, you know, actors, we talked about in Build Back Better about the theatres, but freelance, you know, actors need to earn money in between. So Rachel was temping and came to me for a job. And I was, to be honest, I was so flat. I was setting up this place, like I said, having no idea what I was doing. And literally, I remember saying to Rachel years later, to be honest, like you had like, you know, it sounds like really terrible, but I was like, literally, you walked in, you could speak, you could function, like it took me 30 seconds to decide you got the gig. But actually I said to her, have you ever done PAing before? Have you ever done this type of role? And she said, no, but I'm a great actor. I was like, right, well, just pretend you're really good at it, yeah, and we'll be fine. And like literally, I used to get Rachel to do things like we'd have to, you know, go meet royalty or an MP or whatever, and I'd give her the role, you know, and say, right, your role is you're this brilliant, efficient organizer, and what you need to do is just act it, get into the method. But always with Rachel and with all my staff, you know, there's the whole ask a busy woman stuff, you know, and Rachel was always part-time. And I think the point of being flexible, look, you all know, you know, if you do have children or partners or people to care for in your life, you're busy, you're working, you go home, you do the tea, put everyone to bed or get them sorted, you pick your laptop back up again, you know. And the thing is, I don't care how and when you do the work. You know, if I need something off you by Thursday, I don't care if you're doing it like I would be doing it Wednesday night on midnight, or whether you've organised enough to have scheduled 2 hours in the working day on Monday. I don't care. I just want it done, you know. So I think as a leader, if you kind of put that, if you trust people to do what they say they're going to do, they rarely let you down, to be honest. And I say that given. I work with lots of apprentices that have to learn that lesson. They have to learn that they can't just sneak off and all that type of stuff. But the more trust you give people and the more you empower people, the greater work that you get out of them. Always that's been my experience. So strong advocate of working from home, allowing people to manage their own time. And it'd be interesting to see how education fares in the new world, because I think unfortunately our young people, they've just been given online learning and they've not been taught how to learn, because all they've ever done before is collect qualifications or how to manage the time. So I think, like I said, there's a lot we need to do on skills, but they're dead basic, you know. They're not about knowing particular types of software and the intricacies of law. It's basic stuff we need to instill.
Yeah. Rose, well-being. I know you're part of a very active, book club. As am I. I invited the author of the book we were reading last night. They all got a shock. That's another story for another time. But what do? You know, you're married with 2 kids, with your husband, who's you've been with for 300 years. What do you do to just try and kind of have downtime? Because loads of us are rubbish at it. I can see Roz on here, who's after you, is rubbish at it. So Sam, they're all my mates, which is why I know they're rubbish at it. What do you do to try and have downtime?
Yeah, I'm as rubbish as everybody, and I've got to say my husband was very disappointed in lockdown because he thought he was going to get all this time with me, and like I say, I went on to put on a massive event that just took over my life for about.
Yeah, you need to tell us about it before you go. You've literally got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, we put on together in one voice. We did a huge Sing on Your Doorsteps across Greater Manchester with Liam Gallagher Tate there, James, and people, all sorts of stuff, and it was great. And you can go to togethermcr.com if you want to see the whole of Greater Manchester. And Sally's on it. Sally's on it. Sally's singing away there. We had several 100,000 people join in, and there is, like I say, if you go to togethermcr.com, you'll be able to watch that again. So yeah, so I think I don't have downtime in the way that I probably should. I get energy actually from doing things, and I think that's okay. I mean, we do go for walks and, you know, all that type of thing. But yeah, I don't sit around. I have days. You must all have days where I just do, like, put on, you know, TV or something and just do nothing for a couple of hours. You know. But yeah, I could learn better. So when you get the answer to that, Sally, please do share it, because I'm fairly rubbish at that whole.
Oh, so am I. That's, you know, we're exactly the same. We get energy from doing stuff, and that's okay. But we do reach a point where you just think, oh, I just need to watch some crap telly, or whatever else. Rose, I know you had to go to it at 11. It's 2 minutes past. Can we give a round of applause?
Well, thank you, it's brilliant, and please do come and visit us at the Sharp Project. I'm going off to do an RPAS status meeting, excitingly, so I do have to go and run that.
Oh, well, I'm here till about 12. Yeah, join us if you need.
In real life, yeah.
Yeah. Can you share with me you had the video of Sharp Futures, the one you showed at KPMG or Grant Thornton, and screen you were going to show, and I'll share your Twitter handle so people can follow your work, and I'm sure we'd love to come and see Sharp Futures, but get involved if we can, because it's a really, really good thing, and it fits our ethos and our values, even for our friends in London. So brilliant.
I'll send it all now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rose. I'll speak to you later. Amazing. Right, you thought this day couldn't get any better, right? Trish, are you still with us? Good. Are you still with us? She's not listening. Are you listening? I was just saying, are you still with us? Because I wasn't sure if you had some work to do. I've put everything back on. We've got Ros Beaver, who is next, and is brilliant. I am going to make you big, I'm afraid, Ros, so don't moan.
Okay.
So we can all see you. We can go back to gallery view in a moment. Ros is the head, or Rosalind. On LinkedIn, she's Rosalind. So I'm always trying to tag her.
It's what my mum calls me.
Oh, right. Sorry. I'll try not to be mumsy. She is the head of Irwin Mitchell. She's the national head of family law. She's a leader in her own right. She's in my book, actually. I've just remembered. I can't find the page. I'll come back to it. You've got some people who stalk you on here, Roz, purely from reading the book. Nez is one of them. So it's like meeting a real life celebrity. Roz has 3 children, 3 sons, and she lives in Manchester. I can't seem to make you big for some reason. If you just
Good.
yeah, I might need Trisha's help. When we started lockdown, Trisha and I were hopeless on Zoom, and now Trisha's like the expert. She knows how to do the breakout. There we are. Breakout rooms work and everything else. So, Roz, I want us to start really from the beginning. As a leader in family law, you've had several cases in the Supreme Court. You manage a massive law firm and teams, and we've been stuck at home in all this time, which is a different story we can chat about at the end. But we've got you for slightly longer deliberately. And I want to start from the beginning and talk about really how did you get into law, and then I want to come on to focus on skills and some of the thank you, Nez. Ross is on page 54 to 57 of my Talking Law book. How did you mentioned it there, you didn't start off as a straight lawyer, did you? Because you did a different degree.
No, I started off having worked in the construction industry and done a degree which was all to do with construction management, and then I really didn't like it, and so it was just fortuitous that I managed to get an opportunity to work in a friend's firm, little firm in West Yorkshire, for a paralegal role for the summer holidays. And I never left after that. It was absolutely brilliant. I loved it from the very beginning. But the real reason that I loved it was because of the camaraderie and the support and mentoring, coaching, which I'd never really experienced before. And so I actually think they're the most important things that you can give to others when they are working with you in a team. So I started off in the summer, carried on. Sam was working there as well at the time. We had great fun. Many times completely didn't know what we were doing. Sent to court. No wheelie bags in those days, carrying masses of files. And baptism of fire, but really liked it, really enjoyed it. Very fulfilling.
Yeah. I mean, you now deal with complex, massive, high-profile divorces. Did you ever think you'd go from, construction to that law firm to to leading?
Never in a million years. And I think that it just shows you that anyone can do it, really. The reason that you acquire the skills to enable you to do more complex work is that people give you the opportunity to work on complex cases. And if you have that opportunity, and you have to have a level of drive, but you work in a team with others. So, for example, Sam and other really, really talented barristers, and those people in the team, not necessarily below you, working with you, but doing other parts of that case, then you can have a really, truly dynamic team, which enables you to take cases that perhaps you wouldn't take necessarily if you didn't have that support. You also have to have a bit of nerve as well, I think. But I think most people do if they're given permission to have that nerve.
Yeah. I'm writing it down because this is amazing. So what do you think about skill set? We've got a mixed audience on here today, and our membership is very mixed. We have men, we have junior people entering law, and then we have people who are established partners and people who are associates and so on and so forth. What skills are needed in law, and what skills are we going to need post-COVID?
Well, I mean, it is a given that you need to have the legal skills, but most clients, most people recognise that you've gone through training and you've got those skills, but there are far more important skills. I think they are resilience, flexibility and adaptability, patience. I think emotional intelligence is quite important, and I don't think necessarily just because somebody's not got lots of life skills, they've not got emotional intelligence. We all have to deal with clients and have empathy with them. Sometimes you don't necessarily like them. You've got to be a bit of an actress, I think, and you've got to pretend you like them because they're your client. You've got to look at what their objectives are and be aligned with them. You've got to have consideration. I think that we have leaders who are not necessarily partners in our firms. We have people who have core leadership skills, and I think it's really important as law firms that we don't adopt a hierarchical approach and just give those who have gone through the ranks leadership projects and skills, roles. Because it's not always senior leaders who have the best leadership skills or perceived to be senior leaders, and I don't think we should be hierarchical. I agree entirely with what Rose was saying about engendering trust and empowering people. Don't be a helicopter boss. Don't be a helicopter parent either. Can get you into trouble. I'm a bit the other way. Mine just do as they like. So drag themselves up. I think creativity is really important, and open mind. There's loads and loads of skills, but at the core of it, working as a team and being a team player is really important. And most lawyers are super competitive. I am super competitive. So there's always a tendency to have very sharp elbows, and actually it never gets you anywhere. That the way to get on, in my opinion, is to develop others, because then they trust you and you work together and you become stronger, and you become stronger in a team environment. So I think those skills, I've gone on lots, but I think those skills are really, really important. Promoting those below you, giving them the opportunity, because they will have more to give than you can give in some areas, and it's a give and take scenario.
Ros, you haven't gone on at all. Jill, who's a partner at Lead Day, was nodding and agreeing, as were all of us. So I think that all those are great advice. I'll share the recording so people can really enjoy it. But the only thing I'd say, Ros, is that takes confidence as a leader to be in the zone, to be able to do that, doesn't it? Because quite often, you're right, we are so competitive, but it's not a natural thing. I mean, there are different types of leaders. You're hugely successful. You know, what does it take? When are people ready to do that?
Well, I think all of us operate with a level of imposter syndrome, all of us.
Yeah.
And I actually think, well, I feel like a fraud every single day of my life. And I think to acknowledge that to others is really important. So, you know, we can all go around thinking, oh, I can't do that. But you've got to try and give each other whatever level you're at. So things like 360-degree feedback, reverse mentoring, crucial, I think, because that means that you can take constructive criticism, and criticism needs to be constructive, not negative, and also depersonalizing that is equally difficult. If somebody says anything that's gone wrong on a file of mine, I think it's my fault. It's my fault. I've done something wrong, or it's all my responsibility. But instead of doing that, you have to consciously change your mindset. So you actually think, right, it's gone wrong. How can I find a way to make it better? What's the solution? And I do think that's a bit of experience, really.
Yeah.
But it's also supporting people. And if you have a line manager, or it doesn't have to be your immediate line manager, find a mentor, find somebody who you know has your best interests at heart. Sometimes you can think, who's got my best interests at heart? It might be your friend, it might be your mum, it might be your neighbour, it could be anyone. Talk to them, because you are in a competitive environment as a lawyer, and we've all got targets and we're all wanting to, you know, get on. But it's developing confidence in yourself, acknowledging where you're weak, and thinking about how you will develop. So for me, I know exactly what my development areas are, but I'm nearly 50 now. You know, I've known all along, sort of, but I've never really clearly articulated it. So I think doing that when you're younger would be really helpful, because then we can work on what our strengths are. Does that answer your question?
It does answer it. Sorry, I was just writing on the chat. Trish needs to go and check on her mother, so I was just saying I'll text her over the weekend. Sorry, I was slightly distracted. That answers the question. I mean, you know, developing your confidence, that's all such great advice. Even when you think, you know, you're getting on in the job, but I think particularly when one is starting. So, Ross, my next question is, what are we going to do about COVID? How are we going to survive after COVID? Because you're managing teams remotely. I mean, are some of those skills that we're talking about going to change? And what do you think about, you know, we're not having any camaraderie at court, or, you know, some of the usual stuff we'd have, conferences, none of that. What sort of skills are we going to need post-COVID? Are they a bit different? And how do we manage teams remotely?
Well, we're in a bit of a sort of no man's land at the moment, aren't we? Because at the beginning, it was like crisis. Yeah. What are we going to do? We've got to mobilise all these people to work from home. And that phase was really, really stressful. But also it gave you a buzz with the energy and everything. And now we're in this limbo phase where you're thinking, oh, are we ever going to go back to the office? And at first there was huge amounts of enthusiasm for doing Zoom quizzes, Teams quizzes, scavenger hunts, all sorts of things. And then actually people got a bit weary with it, I think, and thought, you know what, I've got to do my day job as well. So the really important thing is communication. And I actually do believe that face-to-face is better than on the telephone. However, when you've been on screen all day, you can't even go for a wee without turning your screen off. It's a nightmare. So I think building the relationship is about knowing your team, and it's about trusting your team. It's also about listening to what they're actually saying rather than giving instructions. They might tell you something and it might be in code, but if you actively listen, you can usually navigate your way to identify that there is a problem. And they might just appear like there isn't a problem, but there is. So things like accessing wellbeing sites, we have a whole coronavirus site at work, and people are accessing it, you know. So leading, I think it's about devolving power, and it's about trust and playing to people's skills. So because I've got a national role, it doesn't mean to say I'm like telling everyone what to do. I might say, this is where we're going, team. This is what we want to achieve. Can you do that? Can you do this? Playing to people's strengths so that they feel engaged. And thinking about how we move to the next phase is really important, and not just making autocratic decisions. I don't believe that every decision should be made by committee, because otherwise sometimes you don't ever get to an answer.
Yes.
But you should always take soundings, and then you get a really good idea. So for instance, we as a firm do participate in something called Great Place to Work survey, and that survey goes out and we listen to what people are saying. It's an anonymous survey, and that came back, and it gave some really positive feedback about how people are coping during this pandemic, but it also identified areas where people were really struggling. And I think that's really healthy to try and identify where they're struggling. And then we set up action groups so that we've got an action plan, and we can try and identify and navigate our way around. I mean, you can't look at everything, So you've got to focus on the big things. And that's what we're trying to do. I'm in a firm where 70% of the workforce is female. And, you know, the survey came out saying that as a business, we are prioritizing gender neutrality, which is brilliant. I'm saying that because we're talking about women in law. But, and I, as you know, Sally, I don't think women, I don't think race, I actually think everybody. So, yeah. But I'm saying that because we're on a Women in Law conference. So I think taking feedback, listening to what people are telling us and trying to have a plan. Moving to the next stage, I think, is going to be even more challenging, because how do we make offices COVID safe? It's going to be really, really difficult. And actually, we've got to prioritise the safety of colleagues. We've got to prioritise the safety of clients. But there are those individuals who are struggling working from home. So you've got to try and think of a way in which you can look at prioritising people who do want to go back to the office, but also fulfilling people's aspirations in their career by not limiting them, by making sure that you do promote flexibility. And that plan is in a large firm, which I work in, 3,000 people with different offices, different locations, different needs, different locations even within the city. So, for example, in the Manchester office, we're right in the hub of the city. And, you know, most people go into the city on public transport. How do you do that? What about, one of the questions that we had at a Q&A session that we did in the Manchester office last week was, will we have enough parking facilities for bikes? You know, because lots of people are going to use bikes. So all of those things need to be planned. But it is about not one size fits all, and being adaptable and listening to people whilst prioritising the needs of the business as well. So moving to the next phase, I think, is going to be even more challenging. And keeping in touch with people. I think there is some apathy about engaging in Zoom, etc., after work, because people have their targets to meet. They've got so many billable hours that they've got to do. They've got so much that they've got to do at home with responsibilities for children or parents or even a dog, whatever. You know, there is something outside of work. And I do think working from home, I've always worked from home, and I've been my most productive when I've worked from home. But in these times, it's not as productive, because actually your office has come into your home, invaded your space at home, and every opportunity you have, you're logging on. So you've got to step back. And I think we've got to think about how we do that and encourage people to do that and fulfill career progression, etc. I was thinking about it, what both Andy and Rose were saying in terms of young people. Yeah. And obviously digitization is going to be super important, and moving from an office base to a work from home system has forced change on many of us. Digitization fits so well with younger people, but we also need to make sure that people who, they're like, you know, they're not ducks to water with working from home and having to use all the different technology. It's about helping them to change their working practices and giving them the skills, and training people is going to be super important when we go back. Also, I think for our trainees, for our apprentices, what's really, really sad about this situation is because the move was so quick, and you know, you still have to carry on servicing your client work, then during that period of time, necessarily their training has been impacted. How do we address that? Do we defer training contracts? Nobody wants to defer training contracts. Nobody wants to delay qualification. But do we keep, you know, we have a rotating system at Owen Mitchell, and would it be fair for somebody who wanted to come into the family team or another team to come back post-COVID and do a week in their seat? No, of course it wouldn't be, because a lot of them have had to work in a less supervised environment. So necessarily when you're a trainee or an apprentice, you are sat with another team. You're listening to what others within the team are advising their clients. You're actually developing confidence in speaking to clients yourself. But what we can do during this period and use it subsequently is we can limit travel. It's better for the environment. So we can use remote platforms, and make sure as a leader, you should always make sure that you have somebody else on the call with you so that they're learning about how you might navigate your way through giving advice to a new client, etc. And I think it's really important that we do hang on to the positive things that we've found when we get out of lockdown. So, you know, wasting time on a commute, sat in heavy traffic, or having to go on public transport when you don't feel that safe, forget that. Give people the flexibility, let them do what they want, as long as they do the job. Bit like Rose was saying, really. And really entrust people. For our clients, I think they are getting used to new ways of dealing with us and developing relationships. I think the court hearings is quite difficult. Sam will know more than I do because she does more court work than I do now. But certainly, I think there's been a lot of teething problems, and you know, a lot of people saying that they don't necessarily get the same sense of justice, maybe. But lots of directions hearings can be dealt with remotely, and that costs clients less, and it gives you an opportunity to involve your team in those hearings, because before it might have been prohibitively expensive because that particular fee earner at a junior level has a fee earning target, and if they go trudge to court, spend hours waiting, it's a long time out of the day. You can't necessarily charge the client for a training exercise. So it's an opportunity for them to be involved and see what actually happens. I mean, the technology has brought us so much. Just, you know, watching, I don't know whether many of you watched Villiers on at the Supreme Court that was streaming live the other day, but just watching that, it's fantastic that you can have that experience virtually. So there are loads of positives about this situation. And I think it's really difficult to keep positive and think about how actually we can change and learn. The other thing I do think is quite important is we've got to think about new and innovative industries, startups, digitization, digital industries, thinking about entrepreneurial startups and how we can share knowledge with them, how they can share with us and we can share with them would be brilliant. So you might have office space that you don't really need anymore because you don't need that many people in. Could we get a new startup in at discounted rent or something? I don't want to be saying we will do it, Owen Mitchell, because I haven't been given any green lights, but that might be something that we ought to be thinking about. Just complete transformation, because it's not going to go back to how it was before for a long time, I don't think.
No, that was, do you know, my hand is like about to drop off because I'm writing so many of the fantastic things that you're saying, which is advice. I think we all are, actually. I can see Jill's like looking down constantly. Roz, I've got two more questions and I'm going to go to the audience. The first question is in fact, it was in a podcast, and I hope you don't think I was being unkind when I was talking about well-being, because, you know, people always say, well, how do you do it? How do you do it? You know, we get up early and we are in danger of burning out. And your answer about the well-being was that, you know, you weren't great at it. And I know Sam isn't either, so I'm not being unkind. But you'd like an allotment. So I wondered if you'd been doing any gardening or
no, not at all. I've not had time.
As a way. So what, if anything, do you do? And then I'll ask a final question. To just sort of chill out. Do you watch crap telly?
I watch box sets, but I've run out.
Oh.
I do read quite a bit on yeah, I do read quite a bit.
I'll
The
send-
other thing, I've started Couch to 5K, which is a start because I've never done a run for 13 years. Honestly, I looked at it online and I thought, that's easy. 1 minute, no problem. I was nearly dead when I got home. But I've done about 6 of those now. So yeah, quite good. I had an absolute catastrophe earlier in the week. I got up at like 5 a.m. Went on a it's really a fast walk followed by a bit of running in between. And I had I've got 2 iPhones and I had them both in my pockets. When I started running, they both fell out, smashed on the floor. One went into a puddle. So I had no phones for 2 days this week. So it made me chill out a bit, although it made me spend a lot of time at my laptop that when I would have been in bed looking at my phone.
Yes, that's true. Because you're an early riser. I always know how to get you because you get up really early and then we don't do anything for the rest of the day then. Because I know if I do a post on Twitter about 6 in the morning, I know you're up because you always respond. But any other time, there's no response from you because you're working.
To be fair, Sally, I've always been naturally an early riser. It's not because I am a bit of a workaholic, but it's not that. I do get up very early and always have done. So yeah, it's been a bit worse in lockdown because I think it's because we're all a bit stir crazy. So you wake up at this crazy o'clock, and sometimes I wake up at 4 and I think, I need to do this, and try and go back to sleep, and then I think, no.
Yeah.
Get up and do it, and then it'll be done.
Absolutely. Ros, the last question I want to ask you was about, sorry, someone needs to come back in. Well, I've got loads of questions still. I've got 3 more, but let's finish my ones. We'll go to the floor because we've got Dwayne here, who's a recruiter. I think he might have questions. He's in a survey. I want Sam to just give us a quick commentary if she can come on. And we've got some students on here, Malia and Nikki, who want to be solicitors. So I'm sure that this is a great opportunity for them to ask questions. Not statements, please, questions. So the question I wanted to ask you was about Christmas. How did you end up cooking for a load of homeless people Christmas dinner?
They weren't homeless.
Oh.
So they were people who didn't have relatives or people they could be with on Christmas Day. My husband, I'm not, but my husband is an avid church goer. And as you might imagine, not to make a sweeping statement, but this is the case in this particular church. Most of the people who go, most of the congregation are elderly.
Yes.
And therefore, he said to me, I think it'd be really, really great if we did something in the church hall on Christmas Day. Well, in about August, I thought it was a brilliant idea. Right. Christmas Eve wasn't so brilliant, but actually it was fine, and it was probably the most rewarding Christmas dinner time I've ever had. We played bingo, we did, and actually in the same way as if you work in a team, when you work in a team to do something like Christmas dinner on a larger scale, it's actually easier than doing it at home on your own. So it was less stressful than having to do it at home, clear up, have loads of people here for hours and hours afterwards when you're still doing another turkey sandwich, or thinking, when are they going? It was really, really good. So that's how I ended up doing it. It was really rewarding, and we're doing it again this year.
Oh, amazing.
And if they're not all shielding and we're not all self-isolating.
Fingers crossed. I mean, well, before I ask anything else, can we have a round of applause, please, for Ros? And if just you can hear it, it's not a virtual one. She's going to go deaf in a moment from me going like this constantly. Ros, that was absolutely brilliant.